Okay, hello there, everyone, and welcome to today's University Business Webs. Great to have you all with us. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Kurt Isidurley. I'm the web seminar editor here at UB, and I'll be your host. The title of our event, as you see here, is Data in a Time of Crisis of IR During and After COVID-19, and is being brought to you through the generous support of our sponsor for today, Rapid Insight. First off, as members of our audience are still coming in here, a bit of background about our topic and what we'll be discussing here today. Institutional researchers play a crucial role in analyzing and presenting data, giving much needed clarity in strategic decision making. This role is even more important in times of crisis, of course, like that which higher education is experiencing right now. Today, we have a great panel of institutional researchers who will discuss how data can provide stable footing in a time of crisis, as well as some of the challenges and successes their departments are seeing as they support their institutions during the COVID-19 pandemic. We're looking forward to an interesting presentation and fruitful discussion here, plus live Q&A. We welcome your questions, so do stay tuned. We're going to get started in just a minute or two here. First, though, just some standard housekeeping. First item, as it says here, for tech support, if you need it at any time, you can use the chat panel. Just type it in at the right side of your screen there and direct it to our producer. His name's Jason York. Let him know if you're having any technical difficulties. He'll be able to help you out there. Also, second item, if you have any audio trouble at any time, we will post the phone number and access also in that chat panel at the right side of your screen there. You can use that at any time to get audio over the phone if you need it. Also, as I said earlier, we welcome your questions here. Feel free to ask a question of our panelists at any time. Just type it in the Q&A. You should see at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen there. Just make sure it's set to all panelists like it says on the slide here. We're going to be getting to the Q&A portion towards the end of the presentation, but you can ask a question at any time as we're going. Just type it in, again, in the Q&A, not the chat. That's reserved for tech support. If you have a question for our panel, just type it in the Q&A, bottom right-hand corner. Also, speaking of questions, the last item on the slide here, we are commonly asked about accessing the presentation, the content at a later time. Either the slides or the recording. We are recording here. And the answer is yes. Everyone who registered or attended here today, you'll be getting a follow-up email with links to where you can access the slides as well as the archive recording. So if you want to go back over the presentation for your own review, if you want to share with anyone on your team at your institution, any of your colleagues, you'll have an opportunity to do that later on. So don't worry about that. Everyone will be getting that follow-up communication from us. Okay, so with that, on to our program here. As I said earlier, we have a great panel we're very fortunate to have with us. Drew Thiemann is Director of Institutional Research and Effectiveness at Bellarmine University in Louisville, Kentucky. Laura Miller is Director of Institutional Research at Messiah College outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And Joe Herod is Associate Vice President for Institutional Effectiveness at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, also there in Louisville, Kentucky. James Cousins is also with us. He's an Analyst Manager at Rapid Insight. He's going to lead our discussion here and moderate our panel, take us through some discussion prompts. So with that, I'll turn it over to him, James, and our panel. It's great to have you all with us. Thanks for being here today. Welcome to our webinar.
Thank you, Kurt. And of course, thank you also to everybody who made time today. I'm really personally excited to be facilitating this panel because of the work that I know that each of these panelists have done and how excited I am to offer up this platform for them to share their thoughts and to hear your questions. So as Kurt mentioned, the webinar today is focusing on data in a time of crisis, the importance of institutional research, both during and also, of course, after COVID-19. I want to second something that Kurt had been mentioning in encouraging audience questions. We're hoping that we can focus quite a bit of today's effort on fielding questions that people have. The panelists will share their thoughts on some questions that we have in store, but also on questions that you might have. I want to tell you a little bit about our company, but really the emphasis is on getting straight into the actual panel discussion. I think that that's going to be the most exciting part, but there is some relevant context. The company that I work for, Rapid Insight, what we pride ourselves on doing is enabling professionals in higher education to access, to process, to understand and report data more easily for themselves. So this is a software that we sell, but really the most important part for explaining that is that our relationship with our customers through our free and unlimited support has put us in this position of me, fortunately, being able to have directly worked with each of our panelists today. So when we had this opportunity to host a webinar, it was a natural extension of that relationship to ask them to share their thoughts and to be a part of that conversation. So again, without any further ado, I do want to go ahead and introduce the speakers. So we'll start things off. I will introduce Drew and allow him, in fact, to introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. Should be hopefully seeing my video. We decided we would do something a little different than normal and share our faces along with it so you can see our environs. Since I imagine everyone else is in similar situations, I'm working from my kitchen today, a field trip from my normal office setup. As James mentioned and Kyle mentioned, or Kurt rather, sorry, I'm the Director of Institutional Research and Effectiveness at Bellarmine University in Louisville, Kentucky. I came to higher ed through registrar's work and have been in IR for about 14 years. And I am working at Bellarmine for our provost, but ultimately for the full cabinet and institution.
Thanks, Drew. Our next panelist is Laura Miller. Laura, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. You'll see I have a nice, lovely screen behind me because my kids' playroom is actually my work environment right now. They have the run of the house. I'm the Director of Institutional Research at Messiah College. Messiah is a Christian college of liberal and applied arts and sciences in Pennsylvania with grad program and undergraduate programming. I come from a background in psychology and statistics. My master's degree is in child development and family studies. And we're trying to help my children online school while trying to run every possible data analysis at the started in the provost area, really just doing external reporting and assessments, maybe typical starter level type of IR work. And then 9 years ago, the VP for Finance and Planning is where I shifted to. And since then, we've done tons of modeling. And that's when we decided we needed to partner with Rapid Insight.
Excellent. And I am excited for the questions to give an opportunity to discuss a lot of the work that you've been able to do in your position. But our next speaker, not to get ahead of myself, is Joe Herod.
Hello. It's great to be on here today, and I really look forward to this conversation and to hearing questions. Our school is different in that we're a seminary with an attached college. And so we have a FTE of just over 2,800. And so that puts us in a relatively smaller category as some of the universities and colleges go, but very large in terms of seminary. And so I've been in this role for 12 years, and my main responsibility is assessment, effectiveness, accreditation, institutional research, and then some teaching. And it depends on what day of the week and what part of the semester as to which of those gets priority. So I've got a lot of experience on the data side and the data processing, come from an IT background, spent 12 years in IT before coming into this role, which I've been in for 12 years. And right now I'm just trying to figure out how to get a lot of work done without access to coffee shops, because that's my normal rhythm, and it has been disrupted for sure.
Yeah, and seconding that point, I'm not necessarily a huge supporter of any particular coffee franchise, but if you have a major one in mind, that major one that you might be thinking of just recently sold is starting to sell cans of their cold brew, which has been my fix, Joe. So I want to make sure that everybody's familiar with the run of show to make sure that they know how the overall presentation is going to go. In fact, the presentation is not quite right. It's more of a conversation. We have a few, literally 3 seeded questions that our panelists will address in each their own way. And then following those 3 questions, we will be getting to audience questions. We had the opportunity to email some of the registrants ahead of time, and so we have some of those have been pre-submitted, but we will also be drawing those questions from chat. So I think I may have neglected to do this, but just before I step back and let the panelists do all of the speaking, my name is James Cousins. I'm an analyst manager, and now that everyone has introduced themselves, I can, without playing favorites, say that it's been really a pleasure to work with all of them across, in most cases, several years. And so I'm very excited now to turn these questions to them. The first being, what types of data are useful in a time of crisis? And are there differences in how that data needs to be shared and put to use? And to start off this question, which I'll leave up for just a moment longer, I'll ask Laura, if you wouldn't mind fielding it.
Sure. I was told my audio dropped a little bit, so hopefully these headphones are helping. Let me know if they aren't, though. I would say the biggest thing that we did right away in the time of crisis is we inventoried what data is already out there. So we were already in the field with a national survey of student engagement, and we reached out to them and we said, what could we have right now as preliminary data to see kind of after a couple weeks of being in the field, what did it look like a couple weeks later after this, we had moved everybody home. So we looked at that data, we looked at the open-ended responses, and really were able to see from that how we were doing, let the faculty know, and make adjustments in real time. So that was great. If you haven't done that, I really encourage you to do that. The other thing is consider launching a survey right now to current students. We have a survey that we just launched a week ago. Immediately, as soon as we launched it, we had 25% answer the first day. They want to give their opinion right now. So that's been really helpful as well to be able to do intervention for students directly, intervention for faculty, so they know how they're doing with the new online course setup, because we didn't have online courses before at the undergrad level other than a couple courses in the summer, and all of our grad courses were online, but those faculty are different, not the same faculty teaching grad and undergrad. And then I'd say we're thinking about everything right now. We were doing forecasting for short-term enrollment challenges, as I'm sure all of you are, but we were also doing long-term planning. We were doing that all year, and now the long-term planning has just become even more critical. We're not a big college. We're smaller. We have about 2,600 undergraduate students and about 700 to 800 graduate students. The graduate programs are mostly online, so that was not a huge hit. We do have occupational therapy and physical therapy, and those enrollment assumptions definitely might have to change given the new dynamic and course format. But our undergraduate assumptions really are the ones that we're trying to figure out right now, because we weren't online before. So what is, the value proposition for being online right now, and how do we make that work from an enrollment standpoint as well as a faculty load standpoint to make the budget work as well as deliver the best education we can?
Yeah, and I'll follow that up just with the observation that it just so happens to have been the case that I was working with one of your fellow panelists earlier on some investigations of how online education impacts key outcomes. So that's a really pressing matter. And if there were any IR workers out there that were not flexing their survey muscles enough, the time for that is over. So I'll ask that same question for another perspective here. I'll ask that same question of Joe. What types of data are useful in a time of crisis, and are there differences in how data needs to be shared and put to use?
Yeah, to be sure, there's let me take those in reverse order, because one of the things that we found very quickly was with everyone dispersed and some of our key institutional decision makers living in another state, so southern Indiana, just across the river, it is a little bit challenging to get the normal report metrics out there. I can't simply walk down the hall and have a conversation with someone. Now it's going to be by phone or email, or more likely by Zoom. And so we've seen a lot of creative sharing where Zoom screen shares are now a lot more common in looking at data points, but the need to really keep constant data in front of decision makers has been amplified by this, because being so out of rhythm, the normal weekly emails go out, but now there's just so many more emails. And we've even discussed this as panelists, how things are getting lost even more than before. And so trying to find creative ways to visualize some information for quick snapshots, and then give, tabular data for longer in-depth views. Some reports we've created are now running daily. Sometimes we're getting requests twice a day for reports, and found some creative ways to distribute those using shared file systems and things. But also for us, the key metric is looking at enrollment and its associated financial metrics. And so we need to know very quickly, how did the change from an on-campus model to a synchronous online that happened on a Wednesday at 9 p.m. and the following Monday we were live with online classes. How did that affect enrollment for our summer and fall terms, which just opened up simultaneous to all this transition? And so it's been really helpful to benchmark against the last several years, an average of the last several years, and see how fall is shaping up and our early indicators. And then summer is incredibly strong, and it's also helped some of our decision makers to make key changes in tuition structure, fee structure, et cetera.
Wow. Yeah, I can second the email volume, but it's interesting having to increase the cadence of some of the same reports, even outside of new reports.
Very much.
Yeah. In order to make sure that we bring up as many of these questions as possible, I'll go ahead and move on to this following question here. So, next question to the panelists is: how does a crisis like COVID-19 emphasize the importance of IR? I guess it should say also does, but the importance of IR and data literacy at a college or university. And in rehearsals, Joe had an interest in speaking on this topic. So Joe, if you don't mind, can take this one.
Sure. Well, like many of the folks I'm sure who are attending this, those in the IR offices give lots and lots of thought and careful parsing and time into the reporting, and sometimes decision makers have to process that information at a much faster pace than we have the luxury of doing. We get to live in it, and they get to see it for a much shorter time. And so it's been really good to review with deans and program coordinators, provosts, and others, what some of our key definitions on data and some of the limitations are. Sometimes it's saying, we typically would use archived data to have precision, but to get this now, we're going to have to give it live, which has consequences in that it's not complete. You know, these data are still coming in, and so just know that there are limitations. So it's been really helpful for me to remember to explain what it is I'm providing and not just assume that all those who are using the data have the same context. I don't know how my panelists would say that's happened at their institutions.
I'll jump in and mention that this is Drew again, at Bellarmine University. We are fielding much the same types of maybe returning to an ad hoc kind of basis, something we've been combating for a number of years and working really hard to try to make the data literacy question be something that we're agitating for in any conversation as we try to stimulate conversations around campus about effective practices. There's been maybe a bit of a regression at some points here in the last few months as we've made spun up, let's say, new research that maybe still looks like the transactional and operational data that people have wanted to have for a long time. But I think, like we have often done, even over the years without the crisis, anytime we're producing a deliverable, we think about whether it's a sustainable deliverable, whether we can add some texture or context to it. I'll give you a good example from our recent work, and I know people have had questions about this and what they submitted. We had an extended pass-fail option and an extended withdrawal policy that we put in place. Really, the deadline was the last possible day we could do it until open grading began. And of course, now we're running out, and I had an analyst in our office working on a descriptive analytics, really, because we can't compare that to much right now. So I would say the question for us would be helping understand that there's a research agenda that still needs to bubble up out of this. And those confounds we may now have as a result of not having certain conditions in the past be much like what we're dealing with now and probably what we'll deal with in the future. I still hope that our team is emphasizing that we want to be literate about the question, about the research, not just transactions and operations and describing those in new ways, because ultimately that's not as actionable.
Yeah, that's a great point. And then rounding the bases here, Laura, do you have any take on the current question or what Joe and Drew have mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what I take forward is, different modeling that we're having to constantly adjust. And they've seen it before, and they've been very good at understanding that. Stakeholders really, I'm very fortunate, understand the data very well at our institution. There's always some that don't get it as much as others. We've been doing a lot of pre-gaming and also follow-up after every critical meeting. So whenever we're going into a board meeting, we're calling people before and we're calling people after. President's Cabinet meetings, very similar. So if I know that something that I'm doing with the modeling is going to be not understood or questioned by someone maybe that it's affecting their area, or they would like time, I think, for them to be able to react to the change in that modeling, I call them ahead of time. I talk to them afterwards. The nice part about Zoom is that you can really see what everyone's feeling and thinking in that moment. And sometimes you can see it more than when you're in a live meeting, right? Like they have those expressions and you're like, they're confused. I'm going to call them up after this meeting. So it's been nice in that way. I've been very fortunate that way. I'd say the other thing that I keep reiterating to everybody, and I keep saying, I'm here for you. I can review what you're working on. And I would like others to do the same for me, because we're all, I have a 6-year-old and a 12-year-old that I'm helping do online schoolwork at the same time as trying to be on a phone call or a Zoom meeting. So asking others to review your work right now is critical. We're also pulling a lot of new data constantly today, pulling brand new data. for a project and just saying, all right, someone else look at this, make sure my logic makes sense so that we're all in this together. But that data literacy is not just them, it's also us fully understanding with our team what we're pulling and how we're looking at that data and is it accurate. So those relationships that we have with the registrar's office and IT, and they're more critical now than ever in these new types of avenues that we're traveling down.
Yeah, and I find what you say particularly inspiring because what you're describing as being born out of an interest in enforcing data literacy or supporting people through data literacy probably has an indirect impact on the nature of the project itself. Because by trying to make sure that someone truly understands, they then have the tools available to them to actually contribute to it. That's something that we've seen, of course, I've seen through my work as well, but that's a great point. I do want to take just one moment before we get to the next question to remind folks that if you want your question to sort of get picked up in the queue, be sure to put it in the Q&A side of things. Do see a couple coming through in chat, and that's what we're doing on the side is we're sort of lining up the Q&A that's coming in. So please make a note to put it in that window, really just because we want to make sure that we get to it today. And if we don't get to it today, that we are able to file it down for follow-up after the session. So just wanted to take a moment to mention that. With that said, we'll get to the last of these planned questions, and then we're going to be getting into some audience questions after this. So definitely keep those questions coming in. However, before we get there, the last question is, how can data inform future institutional preparedness efforts? Obviously, this is front of mind. I think most people are maybe starting to turn the corner towards actually getting a handle on what's currently happening, even if you have to pivot. But as you're starting to look forward, panelists, how can data help to inform the future in being prepared? And to start things off, I will ask Laura, if you don't mind taking the mic once more.
Sure. Yeah. So I would say the biggest thing that we noticed right away is there were key pieces of data we had asked for years ago that we were kind of told, no, that's not necessary, or that's quite invasive, Laura. Why would you ask for that? Some of it's as simple as I'm sure many of you have access to the learning management system, like looking at engagement within learning management. We don't have that access. Actually, today is the first time I'm actually seeing some access coming our way for us to be able to help students and help identify courses that maybe aren't seeing that type of the engagement that we need right now. So I would say that this has really helped with that, and I think that pathway is now opened up, right? So as we move on, I think that more and more will we become prepared for different times such as this, and the fact that we're not going to ever go back to the old normal, right? So Messiah being very not online for undergrad, so very much on-campus residential. I'm not saying that's going to change, but students' expectations have changed a little bit. You know, we might have to start thinking about how do you deliver courses in a different way because you just did it for months. So it's interesting to think about and how data is going to inform that. The other thing I'd say is scenario planning is at the forefront right now. It's happening everywhere. And to do that within IR is key. Luckily, right before this happened, we had established with our IT the ability for me to remote desktop into a computer that we have at the office to run the really heavy predictive models and all the scheduled reporting. So we have Rapid Insight. We have one of their products construct on a computer there at the office, and scheduled reports go out to people daily in admissions, the registrar's office, grad enrollment, the financial aid office looking at discount rate information. So those were key to be able to keep running, not on my Wi-Fi and internet connection. So having that access was great, but maintaining that is going to be really important. How do we have the access to the tools that we need? So I'd say some key questions just to ask yourself would be, do you have access to all the data you need to help stakeholders navigate those decisions? We didn't. We're starting to get that. We have a lot of data access, just not some of the pieces you would need for this type of crisis. Also think about, like, do you have the right tools available to you so that when it happens, you don't have to be stuck in limbo and trying to figure out how do you do these things just through other means that maybe you don't have access to all your tools when you're off campus as when you're on. So figuring out ways to get access, I think, is really good.
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting that that matches or sounds, I guess, rhymes with something that you were mentioning earlier about that collaboration with others, because the theme being that having your own specific way of doing it that might not be super accessible to others, not being such a strength at this point in time. I'd like to hear from, let's see if I pull up the question here just so that we can all remember that. I'd like to hear from Drew now. How can data inform future preparedness efforts?
Sure. Well, much like Laura mentioned, we've had a number of people on our campus who are embracing new technologies and finding ways to collaborate. So I think the dimension of how we work with one another, I agree. I don't see us ever going back to the way we were, whether that means more telework or remote work, or maybe collaborations that haven't looked the way they did. Outside of our office, a lot of that is happening and people are innovating. Within IR and within our area of the Academic Affairs Division, I would add that, part of what we did from the beginning, as we were, frankly, as the mother of invention was forcing us to learn about teams and ways we could collaborate through video conferencing, I thought it was important for us to re-engage with the people around us who had been our allies, who had been our partners on student success initiatives, including projects we've done using Rapid Insight, as well as some of the other information literacy and reporting infrastructure we've been doing. So thinking about preparation and resiliency amid this, from the IR perspective, I would say it's been helpful to re-circle the wagons with those people around us who were big parts of the work we've done before. So whether I'm having a webinar or a conference with the 3 or 4 people in our office and just checking in on how we're doing, or I might be on a call with 40 or 50 people in the gallery mode, it can be pretty impressive to see just how much energy is going in and how many people are getting in and interested in that work. So I would say that's part of our data approach to this would be, did we have projects that we were already maybe in some fashion working on, that were things that were maybe in the can but not totally ready for prime time yet? Working with the people who had been part of that project has actually gotten easier in some ways because we've been able to, I think, solicit their feedback in different ways. They're more ready to jump online and look at a demo of a thing. And I think they're even beginning to conceive of this work as I mentioned earlier, the idea of a research agenda instead of just operational needs, so that we can begin to plan for the future. Everyone's thinking about plan right now. That's front of mind, and it's not always the case that we have had the luxury of that. But I am grateful for the people around us that have been inspired, I think, by this situation to help with students, of course, but also to look at the infrastructure we have on campus for information and delivery.
Yeah, and that's really cool. That's a really cool thought as well, because it almost sounds like, of course, the data that you're working on and in keeping an eye towards hopefully no future events like this, but potentially, of course, it's almost also a case of current experience informing institutional preparedness efforts. It sounds like some of those strategies are just becoming keys to successful projects, period. So,
yeah. If I can add an example that I meant to mention with this too, rather than just abstractions, I don't know that this would qualify as preparation for another COVID-19, but if we accept that the new normal might be, the new math might be this thing, the best example I can think of in the last week, we were already working with a really good reporting partner in HR, a former student at our university who came back and has been a generalist in HR for 3 or 4 years and really understands the savvy, IT dimensions of our work in querying and pulling together data. He and I had been working on an IPEDS data set, And I know that Rapid Insight even just had a blog post recently about how many of our compliance deadlines haven't changed. We had to do the NPSAS student enrollment file on time. iPads was due. There were extensions offered. But this project for HR was about their iPads reporting, standing up a new warehouse for them to get DataCube, multi-year, year-over-year comparative data. And we had been working with this generalist, and I got a chance to be on a call with the HR director, who is not someone who I have had the option to interface with. So preparedness, maybe not for a disaster or a crisis that calls us to action, but if we have another crisis in the future and we've been able to bring some of those projects over the goal line, that's when we have the space and the capacity to get on top of these other issues or get out ahead of crises. And I mean, getting our HR director on a Teams call to talk through the new warehouse that we were standing up for her, so she could do iPads in a new way that wasn't Excel driven, and that was remarkable for us.
Yeah, it's always nice, of course, too, just as someone who's also working in the professional space amidst all of this. It's also just nice to hear about some of the unintentionally positive moments, I should say, that come out of this. As just another call to submit user questions, audience questions, we're going to hear from Joe here, and then we'll be coming up on the audience questions. So just to give everyone a timing mark there so that you're aware. But first, Joe, how can data inform future institutional preparedness efforts?
Sure. Well, early on in the first week, I think I was on a call with you, James, and I said I'm going to try to coin the phrase for this spring is the Great Disruption, because I don't know of anything that has been such a shared experience around institutions and colleagues around the country and complete strangers around the country and around the world. One of our deans was just commenting how in his lifetime he's never sort of been going through the exact same experience with so many people and so many friends in different states and in different parts of the world at the same time. And so this challenge has been on the bright side of it. It has shown us, right, that we all need to plan long term. We all know we need to plan long term. That comes more naturally for some departments and some institutions and some personalities, but this event has really shown us that one day scenario can come, and it can come really quickly. Like many institutions, we think in terms of reserves for short-term crises, and so many institutions right now are thinking now, what if those short-term crises are extended? What if they're extended indefinitely? We have to remodel that and retool for those things. But it's been a helpful goad in that sense to reinforce the need to make these long-term plans, but also to be flexible in this and to be responsive, always with the goal of being proactive, right? And so, like Laura, it's been really. I'm just so thankful for our IT team here at our school. They have done so many creative things, just for so many departments. But having the ability to work remotely before this and thinking through what would happen if key individuals were unable to work, or if they were incapacitated, or if they were hospitalized, how can we have redundancy in operations to assure key functions continue, down to how can we make sure that our faculty have the ability to teach their classes simultaneously if they're at home or if they're coming into campus. I came into the building today and I'm quite alone on this large campus right now. But our IT team is working, behind the scenes and making all this happen. So it's shown the value of that long-term planning and thinking about hard questions that don't often get brought to the fore. So
Yeah, I can completely agree that I don't know if I have literally seen this as a question in like some some restaurants have the table topics cards that you can use as just conversation starters. And I'm sure that somewhere out there is, where would you stay if you had to stay in the same structure for several months in a row? Which is totally outlandish, but maybe a little bit less outlandish now.
sure.
So that's a great point. So taking a departure from what we had pre-planned, I'm really excited now to be sort of mixing it up and asking some audience questions. So this is definitely the Q&A portion of the presentation. I'm going to try to ask these as best as possible. So there are a huge number of questions coming in, and I'm going to do my best to address the questions to specific speakers, hopefully trying to get to as many of them as possible. Keep in mind that we will follow up with responses to the questions to the best of our abilities. So I will sort of improvise just a little bit and ask of the panelists, if as you go through the questions, if there is a question that you really would like to answer, that you'd really like to address, we had some that were pre-submitted. We'll try to get to those, but just to sort of see how it goes in this first 30 seconds, Drew had let me know that there were a couple of questions that he thinks he might be able to field here. And I'll ask both of the questions, and then I'll turn things over to Drew. So the first aspect of the question, if I can just scroll up just a little bit. I'm going to get there. Here it is. Okay, so William Clark asks, where did you go? Here it is. Could you share what questions you asked in the survey related to our current circumstances? And then a related question, as Drew sees it, is what is one of the biggest mistakes an IR department can make during a time of crisis? So, Drew, I'm excited to see how you span both of those questions in one response.
I think actually if Len Schlegel's question is the one you're talking about, I was looking at the one where he says, isn't survey data difficult to analyze when the week-to-week situation is radically changing? But let me just say, I had a thought about William Clark and Len Schlegel's question. I think Celeste Church and John Snelling, if you're all on the call still, maybe perk up your ears. I mean, I think they're all related to how are we evaluating the information about students that we could gather right now. So how do we construct and collect data is a research question, right? If we're doing evaluations or surveys, it's germane to our work already. We had decided at Bellarmine not to do a student climate survey specifically about COVID-19 in the immediate aftermath, let's say during March. We were pretty sensitive, I hope, to the idea that students are just dealing with so much. The command decision-making they're having to make about working, not having part-time jobs, having to go back home to another time zone, not having places where they could potentially work on projects at home. So we waited. And then the number of staff and faculty and eventually administrative officers asking us for, what can we do? How can we know what's happening? Just was mounting. And so we went out, we cast out for really good instruments. We looked at NASPA and ACPA and EDUCAUSE, other groups that had developed similar surveys. I'm sure your all inboxes are being flooded with, webinar options and chances to sit and just talk with your colleagues. Well, we were getting a lot of that together. The way we decided to ask the question really was down to one or two research questions. How are you doing right now? And do you need anything from us that we can help you get? So I know that there is a tendency or a temptation to ask questions about like the natural experiment variety, like, hey, how's online teaching and learning working for you? When no one was expecting to do this, when our online programs are in their infancy, even though we have many, it's not something that had been built up. And the response rate we got was overwhelming. Laura, you mentioned that you had 25% response rate in the first day. We were about the same. And our regular climate survey, which just ran in its every other year cycle last fall, we were like 28, 29% response rate. And we ended up this one closer to 33. which I think speaks to that question of, hey, we want to care for you. How can we show you that care? We put together executive summaries. We've been able to distribute that to different offices, from the military and veterans to international to the work on our trio. Just so many people are interested, and yet we did not want to overwhelm students on top of every other thing that's going on in their lives. And so, yeah, it's not, to Len's question, not possible maybe to analyze this in a week-to-week way or even understand what it means in a longitudinal context. But we were able to farm out people who said, I really would like to be contacted by this person. We had that question. Is there anyone that you have worked with that you would like to reach out to you? On top of our already calling every undergraduate, which was being done at that point. And so we've been able to connect students to resources about housing where they think they'll live in the fall or summer. And I'll leave it there, but there's just been a lot of really good that came out of that effort.
I also appreciate the mindful approach that you took. It's a big topic of, anytime you have surveys, that some are you sign on and it's less optional, the way that you ask them or how you deliver them and what intervals. But it's really, I think, one of the themes right now of most successful initiatives are that they are putting constituents, putting students, and in the admissions case, putting prospects and high school seniors and juniors front of mind. So that's a great reminder in all of the efforts that we pursue, to really keep an eye on the main goal. Let's see. There are, again, a lot of questions, but I know that Laura is very notably getting out of or starting or juggling several survey efforts. So Laura, would you mind, there are several questions from the audience that surround the topic of surveys. And so I think speaking to the questions, speaking to the timing, speaking of the analysis of what you're gathering, I think that would be helpful for the audience.
Yeah, so I wanted to make sure, a lot of people asked me privately, and then also I think I someone else publicly, like, yes, we use Nessie whenever we did that one piece that I was talking about. We looked at open-ended questions to just really say, open-ended questions after this started, is anyone really upset? What are we doing wrong? So we didn't do the typical analysis an IR person would do. Right now, what we have out in the field is a survey to students that literally says, this is a check-in survey. We want to know how we can help you. We are following up with you. So only answer this if you're okay with that. So people connected to you at this institution will know your answer. So on that survey, we asked things like, are you having difficulty accessing technology? We went and asked, we looked at the head survey. They were very nice and shared that out with everybody and said, if you want to use these questions, let us know. There were a couple questions on there that were really helpful. We used some of those. We used some questions about, we wanted to ask specifically, like, for our faculty to understand what the students were dealing with. We wanted to know if they're helping their siblings with their schoolwork while they're trying to do their own. We wanted to measure their lack of independence, because we were hearing that a lot through social media or in conversations with students. So we wanted to measure that. We wanted to measure how much they were sharing their electronics, how concerned they were about their Wi-Fi and their internet connectivity. The reason why we did that is so hopefully those questions would be helpful to the faculty themselves. So I would say we put more open-ended questions now than we ever have, because it's not that we have more time to answer to analyze open-ended questions, but because it's almost as if the analysis is so different. How do you look at that right now and make some change based on how people feel and just letting them talk? And a lot of them are talking. I mean, typically you put open-ended and we have a couple responses. 444 are open-ended the first day of just wanting to talk. Many positive, couple having concerns. So we're making sure we read those and we get those to the right people to go help those students. So that's critical, time consuming, but really helpful. So it's not your typical survey analysis and collection. The other thing I'd say is we're going to be using that data for scenario planning. So as we plan for fall and for future, what does this look like? Or how did we do in this move to online? Or would we consider going online more often? that kind of thing for an institution like ours, where we hadn't been online like that, was critical. We really focus on the community aspect of Messiah as the value proposition, and its and the robustness of the in-person courses and the lab work and all that. So we wanted to measure, we had mailed lab kits home to every student so that they could still do labs for the labs that we were able to do that for. And we wanted to look to see if they were getting those, if it was working. So all of those things are kind of being used more for scenario planning and for direct intervention rather than a typical report that we could send out.
That's a very elevated version of primary schools sending home Chromebooks with Chromebooks and Blizzard bags with children. So that's a really cool initiative, and it's been neat to hear. Aside from, so on the survey data, the thing that strikes me, if I may, is the increased use of open-ended questions. It sort of resonates with, of course, the adage that if you're not prepared to actually change anything based on an answer, you shouldn't probably ask the question. And the enforced, but I think also the enthusiastic willingness to change the way that things are delivered, the way that students are supported, that employees are supported. It makes a lot of sense with the open-ended questions, because you can be much more receptive to feedback you can't control by definition, if you're at this stage where everyone's on board with that level of change. So that's really cool. Let's see, I'm going to try as hard as I can to squeeze in as many questions. I think I've said that a couple times. Probably could have shaved off a few minutes if I didn't. I want to ask a question to Joe. And there are a lot of questions about sort of surrounding the value add of online education, some of the potential impacts of a quick transition to that. So I don't want to tailor the question too much and neglect some of the several other questions. So Joe, on the topic of online education, in supporting the transition, in trying to get ahead of some of the potential implications, what are you doing to support your institution?
Yeah, well, I won't claim a ton of credit on this. I want to make sure that our global campus team gets a lot of credit, because they were, I think, 2 weeks ahead of many others in the institution in sort of watching the news, and they saw this coming. They saw something coming down the pike faster than I think many other offices did, and certainly maybe some other institutions. And so our VP over that area had already begun thinking, if I had to train 60 faculty members how to use Zoom to teach graduate level classes and undergraduate level classes, and I had to do it quick, what would I do? And he put together a training session. And so we made a decision on Wednesday at 9 p.m., fueled largely by the necessity of our governor, right? You can't continue having dorm residents. It's not safe. And so we had a very quick transition. Well, by noon on Thursday, the first training sessions were already happening. And so online has been a growing and significant part of our model for the last decade. But for us, online typically means asynchronous. We would have some sort of Zoom enhanced sessions at the beginning and end of a term, a lot of Q&A. But for us, like many other institutions, we have students all over the world, and so getting folks to participate live was a challenge in the online model. So we would use it a little bit, and so Zoom wasn't completely foreign. But for maybe a third of our faculty, they'd never actually had to use Zoom before, and so very quickly getting in and sort of doing our best and recognizing, I think we all heard immediately, you can't just do what you would do in a typical 3-hour lecture format. And after the first week, I think we all realized exactly that was true. You know, this is going to be painful for us. It's going to be painful for students. So we're going to have to change techniques. In terms of value add, it's been really cool as a faculty member to see the value add and to really have to go back to school myself after the first week and talking to colleagues and saying, okay, this kind of worked. We had, the technology was great. We had a great connection. We didn't have anybody, you know, with any troubles. But pedagogically, what can we do to make this not just we're going to get through the semester, but we're going to really, we're going to deliver what we, not an equivalent in the time we can, but we're going to make it excellent. And so it's really challenged me to think through a lot of scenarios. One of the challenges we're facing is all of our summer courses have transitioned to online delivery, synchronous online. So now we have a month to prepare. And so I think there's even more helpful conversations happening about how do we still ensure that students get what we think is, you know, the most important things, but how do we do it in a different way? So it's really pushed us to rethink pedagogy, to rethink how are we going to assess learning outcomes when we can't go about the same type. It's very interesting. Drew and I, we're both accredited by the same regional accrediting agency, and I'm the liaison here at our school, and so I see all the communication back and forth. And one of the communications was, we assume that there won't be any effectiveness assessment happening this spring, so that just know that that's going to be okay. Well, in a week and a half, I've got my big assessment day with my undergrad faculty, and we're going to try to do this decentralized. It's already, we're trying to keep it because we say we want to know how this experience has affected outcomes. We want to see as much as we're able, and so it's been really challenging on the one hand to adapt, but it's also been very it's a good challenge because I think it's stretched me and so many of my colleagues to be creative and to strive for creativity and to get feedback, to ask. Our normal course evaluation cycle was already scheduled, and so it was going live, and so we're receiving those now, but we want to mine that information and hope to see how might this change, because that's part of the unexpected situation for fall that we're thinking through is, what if we have to continue this delivery or some hybrid form of it into August or September? What if fall doesn't start in August? What if it has to start in October? And so it's from a teaching standpoint, where we already had a good online program, now it's forced us to ask even more questions like that.
It's interesting that, just to bring that insight also up to that higher level too, because you're saying that partially from the perspective of a faculty member, but that's also been, you know, the methods of institutional research may not have changed. Surveys aren't new, analysis isn't new, regression's not new, but the way that we're going about it, just like your course delivery, you know, the nature of IR in that sense also needs to respond. I want to be sensitive of everyone's time. I also want to give about the amount of time I wanted to from the start. I just want to remind everybody, we love being parts of conversations like these, and when it's not for webinars like this, it's with our customers directly in the moment of trying to help them through a model, through a survey analysis, through data preparation. I'll just leave it at that. Our software makes it very easy to accomplish that, and myself and my team of analysts, we literally work here because we are allowed to work with people like Joe, with people like Drew, and with people like Laura. So I want to thank them from the bottom of my heart. I really appreciate not just this moment, but everyone that led up to it. I also want to thank all of the audience members. It's meant a lot that we got so many questions. We will try very hard to respond to each one of them and then to distribute that as a follow-up. I've enjoyed this session tremendously. It's of course been a little stressful trying to keep up with the questions, but that's part of the game. And with that, thank you, Drew. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Laura.
Great, and thank you, James, so much for being with us. Thank you to everyone in our audience for joining us today. I hope you found our discussion informative and useful to you. Producing webinars like this one is just part of our mission here at UB to inform college and university leaders like you about the latest news and trends in higher ed management. Just a little plug here that you'll find more coverage about issues such as the ones we looked at here in the pages of our print magazine, as well as our digital edition on our website, through additional webinars like this one, and through our various e-newsletters, which you can sign up for right on our website. And as I mentioned before, for those of you who would like to access the content, the slides, or the recording of our discussion here, it will be archived on the UB site and at the URL on your screen. And also everyone will be getting a follow-up email with links to the slides and where you can find the recording. And also, as James mentioned, if you didn't get your questions answered, we will be gathering all of those and following up with you later on. Someone will get in touch with you to answer any of your questions. So once again, that's it for today's event. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Kurt Osley-Durley for University Business on behalf of our production team and everyone here at UB. Goodbye, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Please stay safe. Thank you so much.